Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have my ranking of all of the Shannara novels by Terry Brooks. I have been a big fan of Terry Brooks's Shannara series. I started reading it in 2017 when I picked up his first book because I had heard it was like Lord of the Rings and had some like Star Wars tropes in it. And so I was like, I want to try that out. And it was my first like adult fantasy novel that I read all the way through, and I loved it. And I got hooked on the genre. And ever since, I have been reading these Shannara novels, and I've reread some of them a couple times. I've read others only once, but I have finished the entire 29 book series. And I decided to rank all of them. I do have some caveats. I am putting the trilogies and tetralogies and duologies together, but there is one trilogy that I did split up, and that's the original trilogy, which is Sword of Shannara, Elfstones, and Wishsong. I split up that trilogy because the books are so separate that it didn't feel good to link them all together, whereas all the rest of these books, these trilogies, are like a single story in 3 parts. Whereas the original trilogy is 3 separate stories. And so I decided to split that one up. But the rest of them I put together. And so there are 12 spots on this list of the Shannara novels. And so why don't I begin with my number 12. I only have 2 on here that I consider not great. The first one is, my number 12 is the Legends of Shannara duology. That includes Bearers of the Black Staff and Measure of Magic. I've been saying we need more books about the formation of the Four Lands and seeing everything format and seeing how everything happens after the events of Genesis of Shannara. And this had huge promise of a duology. I thought that this had a really good idea behind it, but it just doesn't execute it at all. He decides to go in one direction that just all his other stories do, and he doesn't take it in the direction that the story is supposed to go. So the books are just bland and boring, sadly. My number 11 is The Defenders of Shannara, which I read earlier this year. This was an unfortunate step down from his normal writing style. And you have the books The High Druid's Blade, The Darkling Child, and The Sorcerer's Daughter. Some fantastic elements. Like the first 40 or 50 pages of The High Druid's Blade were really well done. But as a whole, the trilogy fell flat because he didn't have a solid enough plan, I think, and I think that he was just kind of on autopilot with this series. I think that he does right the course when he gets to the Fall series, which was the series that happens after this, which is the final series. I think he righted the course. But at this point, I think he was just kind of writing Shannara novels to write Shannara novels. He didn't have purpose. He felt kind of aimless, which is why they're kind of boring. But those are the 2 series, the Legends series and the Defender series, that I don't think are good. I think those are the only 2 bad ones. I think the rest of the series on here are either good or great. And so probably the series that's going to be most controversial for how low I've put it is the Heritage of Shannara series. You have the first 2 books, Scions of Shannara and the Druid of Shannara, and then you have Elf Queen of Shannara and the Talismans of Shannara. This is the tetralogy, or quartet, if you will, that really put him on the map with a lot of fantasy readers. Before this, he had done the original trilogy, which was kind of disparate, across the timeline, and he'd done his other series, the Landover series, which was like standalone books as part of the series. This was the first time that Terry Brooks wrote a 4-book outline and really had a plan for all of it. And this tetralogy is really entertaining. I think that the weak elements of this story dramatically drop it in terms of quality. I think that, Elf Queen is not entertaining at all, and I think it just really slowed down the pace and felt unnecessary. I think he should have made this a trilogy and folded the events of this into the other 3 books. And so I just think that as a tetralogy, it's not solid. It doesn't feel like it's as solid as some of his other books, which is why this is at number 10. Next, we're going to my number 9 on my list, which is the Dark Legacy of Shannara trilogy. You have Wards of Faerie, you have Bloodfire Quest, and we have Witch Wraith. This was a trilogy that felt like the closest to a D&D campaign. And when I was reading this one, I was like, you know what? This feels the most just classic telling an adventure story in this universe. This felt the least like, Tolkien, and the most like 80s fantasy, even though this came out in the late 2000s, early 2010s. That's what it kind of felt like. And so I enjoyed it, not as much as other Shannara books, but I really enjoyed it, which is why it's my number 9. My number 8 is the High Druid of Shannara trilogy. This has what I believe is one of the coolest concepts. The idea that one of the druids gets thrown into basically the Shannara version of hell and has to make their way back into the Four Lands, and it kind of follows the kind of Greek or Roman hero's journey type thing. I thought that was a great idea, and I loved the main characters in this book, this trilogy. And let me make sure I get the names of the trilogy real quick. It is Jarka Rus, Taniquil, and Shraken. And this trilogy has a really terrific ending. It's really bittersweet, and that's why it's my number 8. It could have been higher, but his execution, that's the biggest problem with Brooks, is his execution. Going to my number 7 is Wishsong of Shannara. This is a special, special book. This book, if you're familiar, there is a major character who dies in this book, and it's effective. And of the original trilogy, this is the one where I connected with the main Ormsford character the least, and this is the novel that I felt the overall plot line was the weakest, but it's still a terrific book. This one we get to explore the Eastlands with the dwarves, and the mist wraiths the Mord wraiths in this book are really good. And the exploration of the Wish Song is something that goes on for the rest of the Shannara series, and is just really good. I mentioned earlier that after he had that weak spot of Defenders of Shannara, that Terry Brooks came back and just did an epic storytelling, and that is the Fall of Shannara, the final Shannara series. You have the Black Elfstone, you have the Scar Invasion, you have the Steel Assassin, and you have the Last Druid. And I like that this tetralogy, as you look at it, you see the character is fully facing away from the picture, and then the character's kind of turned a little bit, and then you see her from the side, and then the final book, you see her from the front. And so it's an interesting cover design. But this is the last Shannara series, and it feels like this is when Terry Brooks recaptured the magic. It feels like he found his footing again. He knew what he was doing with this finale, and he really wanted to do it justice. And I think that was that's why this tetralogy is really solid. So going to the top 5 now, the top 5 books and or series for Shannara. And the number 5 spot is the Genesis of Shannara trilogy with Armageddon's Children, with Elves of Sintra, and the Gypsy Morph. This is the trilogy most unlike all the others in the Shannara universe because it is basically an apocalyptic story, and it reads more like an urban fantasy because it's connected to his Word and Void trilogy, and so it feels very different than anything else. But because of that, it feels fresh, it's innovative, it's creative, it is entertaining, and this trilogy just showed that Terry Brooks can still write Shannara novels, but can flex his muscles in the way he does so. And so I really love this trilogy, and I think that it doesn't get talked about enough in terms of Terry Brooks' books. So next, I have the prequel novel, which I really loved and have loved since I first read it, and that is The First King of Shannara. I had it higher on my list in the past, and I think I bumped it down a little bit because on a reread, it didn't hold up quite as well as I had initially said it does, but it's still a terrific prequel. This book sets up a lot of the stuff in the original Sword of Shannara. It also gets exploration of the Druids and what the Druid stuff was like. Like, we see a lot of Druids after Alenon, But to me, the most interesting thing is what were the Druids like before Al-Anon? And you see the end of the Druids before Al-Anon. I wish we had another trilogy that was set between the Bears of the Black Staff books, the Legends books, and this book. I wish we had like another trilogy that explains that timeline, because that's the stuff I want to see the most. But this book is still really good. The action sequences are probably the best that Terry Brooks has ever written. Is that the action scenes in this book? So they're really good. Next, we have the book that my number 3 is the book that everybody in the fandom loves. This is the one that people put as their favorite. Sorry about that. This is the book that everybody puts as their favorite Shannara book. It's the book that connects the most with the fans. It's the book that the TV producers felt confident enough that this would be a good starting point to start the TV series, and that is the Elves of Shannara at number 3. I love this book, and I actually, sometimes some of these books I had higher, and they lowered them over time because they just didn't connect with me as much. This is a book that I read it initially, and I enjoyed it, but it wasn't as high for me, and over time it's climbed in my estimation. This is because this book really does get emotion from the characters well, and it also gets good storytelling. It's in terms of plot and in terms of payoffs and stuff, and it does a really good twist towards the end. Not exactly a twist, but it does a good subversive finale, I guess. And there's a reason it's such a good book and is so beloved by the fans. So it's not my favorite of the series, but man, is it a great book. Next, my number 2 is what I think is the best single trilogy that Terry Brooks has written. It is some of the best adventure storytelling out there. And to me, that is the Voyage of Shannara, including Isle Witch, including Anthrax, and Morgaware. This is when Terry Brooks said, hey, let's go beyond the 4 lands and let's explore Parkasia, which is really just Asia. And it's interesting, reading the Fall series, he explores Eurodia, which is basically Europe. And I forgot, he has a word for Africana, or for Africa, it may have been Africana, but he mentions that. But it's funny that he basically just keeps, for the other lands, for the other continents, basically just keeps the name and just adds something to it. So this is Parkasia. This trilogy has the best villains in the series, and it's actually why the title of each one is based off the villain of the book. The villain of this book is the Isle Witch, the villain of this book is Anthrax, and the villain of this book is Morgaware. The best villains in the series, bar none. The great protagonists, great use of the Druid Walker Bow, great use of the Umsford family, and great this takes the familiar stuff of you have a Druid, you have the Umsfords, you have, a quest, all that stuff, but it changes the way things are done. This trilogy introduced the ships that they fly, and this trilogy introduced the idea of the rovers being more than just people that travel around. And I just thought that this was a brilliant exploration of the Shannara universe. And the way that it just feels so dark and mysterious, and the way that you feel for the characters so well. And the romance in this trilogy is my favorite romance, and it's a little icky, but it's my favorite romance in all the Shannara universe. So that is why the Voyage of Shannara is my number 2. But if you're keeping track, there is very obviously one book that I have not talked about, and it is probably the most famous Shannara novel, besides maybe Elfstone's, and that is the original Shannara novel, The Sword of Shannara. As I mentioned earlier, I picked this book up in 2017. I've reread it probably 2 or 3 times. I love this book. This is one of the fantasy books that is nearest and dearest to my heart. If I'm ranking individual fantasy novels, this one's up there in my top 5 for sure. Yes, it is derivative of Lord of the Rings. Yes, it is not completely original, and it is a little bit boring in the way it does storytelling. But it is a terrific, entertaining romp. It is adventure storytelling. It is an easier to read Lord of the Rings. There's times where I'm like, I just want the story. I don't want to have to deal with all the difficult stuff in Lord of the Rings. And this does that. So I love The Sword of Shannara. I don't think that anything in the Shannara universe comes close in my enjoyment. So that's my ranking of the Shannara novels and series. If you've read any of the Shannara books, let me know your thoughts in the comments section down below. But until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.